Martha Jane Canary was quite a character. She drank like a fish, talked like a sailor, and dressed like a man. One of the most famous names in the Wild West. Most folks don't really know much about her, except what they've seen in movies or TV shows. Even in her own day, much of what people knew about her came from her own stories.
And she could tell a story better than just about anyone, whether it was true or not, which makes finding the truth about Martha Jane Canary's life almost impossible at times. They called her Calamity Jane. Here's a quick look at a few more famous stories about her notoriously difficult life.
Let's dig into this.
Martha Jane Canary was born on May 1st, 1852, in Princeton, Missouri. Some reports say her parents, Robert and Charlotte Canary, were petty criminals, while others say Charlotte was a call girl. But most reports say Robert was a farmer.
Calamity Jane herself has said that she was the oldest child and had two brothers and three sisters. In 1865, the Canary family packed up their few belongings and moved to Montana to look for gold. Her mother died on the trip, and the family moved on to Salt Lake City, where Robert Canary died in 1867, making Calamity, at about 14 or 15 years old, an orphan and the head of her family. It was the first time she had great responsibility put on her shoulders, and she took it seriously.
Calamity packed up the family and went north to Piedmont, Wyoming. She took whatever job she could to support her siblings and worked as a dishwasher, cook, waitress, nurse, and ox team driver. By 1874, she was working part time as a call girl at Fort Laramie 3 Mile Hog Ranch, dancing, drinking, and dallying with soldiers. This is around the same time she began working as a scout in the Indian Wars, according to her well embellished autobiography.
Martha Jane said she was christened Calamity in 1872 or 1873 by a Captain Egan, commander of the post at Goose Creek, Wyoming, when she saved his life. She said she had been out for days on a campaign where 6 soldiers had been killed and many others injured. On the way back to the post, she heard a shot and turned to see Captain Egan about to fall out of his saddle. She claims she turned her horse around and galloped up just in time to pull the captain onto her horse and get him back to the post. He supposedly told her she would be known as Calamity Jane, the heroine of the plains, from then on.
But in an article published on April 19th, 1904, in the Anaconda Standard, Captain Jack Crawford, who had served at the fort, stated Calamity had never served in any capacity there. He said she was a notorious character and was popular because she had a generous streak. But she didn't save Captain Egan.
She gained quite a reputation in Wyoming for her skill with guns, dressing in men's clothing, drinking to excess, and chewing tobacco. It could be that Martha Jane just gave herself the nickname. She reportedly told men that to offend her was to court calamity. Other reports say her name came from the fact that her life had been filled with calamity.
What we can say for sure is Martha Jane was well known as Calamity by the time she reached Deadwood, South Dakota in 1876. She was already something of a celebrity by then. The Black Hills Pioneer newspaper even ran a headline on July 15th of that year saying, Calamity Jane has arrived.
No one seems to know for sure where the name comes from, but it sure served her well. 120 years after her death, you won't find many people who instantly know who Martha Jane Canary is. But Calamity Jane, well, everybody knows that name.
Calamity Jane wrote an autobiography in 1896, and in it she mentioned her friend, Wild Bill Hickok. But by 1902, she was telling people he was her fiance. By the end of her life, she insisted they had been married. Back in 1876, both Calamity and Hickok had been in Deadwood, South Dakota at the same time, but only for about 6 weeks before Hickok was murdered during a card game in the saloon. When Calamity died, she was buried next to Wild Bill, and many reports of the day say it was done as a joke because Hickok actually couldn't stand her. Of course, other reports state the opposite. Calamity was very much in love with Wild Bill.
In 1941, a woman named Jean McCormick made headlines when she claimed to be the daughter of Calamity and Wild Bill. She said she had love letters, a diary, and a marriage certificate to prove it, too. These papers were all believed to be forgeries made by McCormick in an attempt to gain fame and money. Most historians believe Calamity couldn't write, making love letters and diaries highly unlikely. And there are many inaccuracies in the McCormick story. No records have ever been found to support the claim that Calamity and Wild Bill had been married.
Calamity claimed she had married Clinton Burke in 1885 in El Paso, Texas. But reports show she wasn't even in El Paso at that time. Many historians believe she married Bill Steers in Wyoming and had children, but this can't be proven either.
In 1895, Calamity showed up in Deadwood, South Dakota, with a child she claimed was her daughter. This girl was probably Jessie, possibly born in October of 1887. The evidence for this child comes from a report in the Cheyenne Daily Leader saying that Calamity had been arrested in June of 1887 for drunkenness. She gave the judge on the case a note saying she was in a delicate condition, the common term for pregnancy in those days. While in Deadwood, she held a fundraiser to pay for the tuition of the child at a Catholic boarding school for girls and raised quite a bit of money. Unfortunately, she spent a lot of it the same night at the saloon drinking.
Then, in late 1895, Calamity did an interview for Illustrated American magazine. The writer, M.L. Fox, met Jessie. The girl was Calamity's pride and joy. By 1903, Calamity said Jessie had gotten married, moved to North Dakota, and had 2 children. But apparently, the two had had a falling out and not spoken in some time. Jessie died in 1980 in California, and her death certificate, as well as several marriage certificates, list her mother's maiden name as Martha Canary.
There's a strong likelihood that Calamity had 2 children with Bill Steers in Wyoming. Reports of a son who died as an infant and a daughter that lived into the 1960s is common. In 1882, newspapers in Miles City, Montana reported Calamity had given birth to a boy she named Calamity, but he died before the end of the year. And it could be possible that the daughter who supposedly lived into the 1960s is actually Jessie with mistaken dates.
In 1996, Ruth Shadley wrote a book in which she claimed her mother, Maud Weir, was Calamity's daughter. No evidence has proved this, although the two women did look alike. And of course, there's the 1941 claim of Jean McCormick, which have been mostly disproved. So even though the evidence here is really murky, it seems Calamity did have children, possibly 3 or 4, but most likely 2, the son called Calamity and daughter Jessie.
Calamity Jane had a hard life by anyone's measure, but she seemed to be quite popular. Dime novels were written about her adventures, and she appeared in Buffalo Bill's Wild West shows as a storyteller and sharpshooter. But she did tend to get fired a lot for drunkenness and rowdy behavior.
The town of Deadwood in South Dakota loved her, and by all reports, she loved the rough town of Deadwood too. When she returned there in 1895 after being gone more than 15 years, Newspapers announced her arrival with the headlines and reminded residents that she was known to be a generous to everyone, regardless of their circumstance or the color of their skin. In 1878, when smallpox hit the area, she had nursed those who were sick, putting herself at risk without a second thought.
Unfortunately, Calamity also had a big problem with liquor and seems to have been an alcoholic for most, if not all, of her adult life. She reportedly could be found in the saloon as soon as she had any money in her pocket.
When she returned to Deadwood again in 1903, it would be for the last time. She had no money and may have had early signs of the illness that would contribute to her death. She worked as a cook and laundress at Dora Dufran's house of ill repute for a few months before taking a train to Terry, South Dakota. She was said to be drinking heavily on the train.
By the time the train reached the town of Terry, Calamity was really ill. The train conductor carried her to the Callaway Hotel, and a doctor was called. She died in the hotel on August 1st, 1903. Her death was attributed to inflammation of the bowel and pneumonia.
It was reported that she was dying. Calamity Jane asked to be buried next to Wild Bill Hickok. As we said earlier, she may have been buried there as a colossal joke, too. But the reason doesn't really matter. She was back in the town she loved, next to the man she loved, a fitting resting place for Calamity Jane.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
And we'll see you on the next one.